Hey everyone. Someone want to take notes? They can be light.
I can take the notes. I just need a minute.
All right, no problem. We're designating 0. And I don't think there's much in the way of RFCs except for the updated blueprints RFC. And no one else has put any topics. So if anyone else has anything they want to talk about, by all means, add it to the agenda. But let's start with the updated blueprints RFC, which I might screen share.
Yeah, I put it here. I didn't plan on presenting anything, so.
No, I understand.
Go for it, Rash.
I do understand. So, long time coming. The blueprints proposal has been external and then internal and is now external again. So we're here to share it. This goes into, I think, quite a lot of detail about why. Lots and lots of detail, according to Emily, because you had to copy it all. It references two important links. This one here, which is the 3 CRDs with documentation that we're proposing for blueprints as a complete replacement for supply chains, and an implementation example of one of the it's not actually of any of the supply chains, but it was a supply chain that would have all of the problems that we're trying to tackle, things like reason to nest something and need to rename parameters and all of that kind of thing. So that's there for everyone to look at and provide feedback on as well. I have already shared most of that with you, Scott, as the only external contributor here. I just thought you'd be pleased to see it actually explained.
Yeah, no, this will be awesome. I'll take a look at it again. Be awesome.
I don't know if anyone wanted to talk to it at all at this point. Just thought it was
So
great.
just from my understanding, it was decided that we're moving to the new API types and not making iterative changes on the existing types for the meantime.
Okay, so the decision really is that we wouldn't be doing any serious work on the existing types unless they are two things. One, something that could be supported in a migration effort to the new blueprints. So that is, we're not going to create something that would then leave people adrift and not able to consume blueprints in the future. And important enough for some value of important, which I guess would be designed by decided by committee or product, or I'm not sure who. But the general idea is, at the moment, the work is to shore up security and stability of the existing system, while also working on the new blueprints. That's the main plans.
Makes sense.
Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Cara?
No, I think you got it.
Was there something in you had in mind, Scott?
No, it was just based on the previous office hours where the conversation was going on of, do we make the cutover to a new API type now, which is something that you really only want to do once and not many times do a full revamp of a project. I know there were differing opinions amongst people of how that should be done. If we wanted to do the break now or try to iterate the changes into supply chains. And then
I think it's fairly unanimous that most of us want to make a break. because the iteration is somewhat preclusive of getting the work done.
Yeah. It's also what I was more in favor of before, so I'm happy with that. I like having new API types, so yay.
Yeah. I think it also makes it easier for us to maintain the quality or improve the quality of the existing code too, right? Rather than add more conditional logic that could probably send things spiraling. To your question before, actually, there is one thing that's on my mind that I would like to float, which is at least having Go-based table testing for templates and supply chains, so that folks can do unit testing without having to have a cluster running to, prove that the templates are stamping how they expect them to, the YTT is doing what they expect, inputs are being picked up the way they expect, and that they've configured a supply chain correctly. So there is some work that we'd still consider doing too, I think, just to improve the experience with the current supply chains.
Awesome.
That's all I had on the blueprints at this point. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to that?
Not really. One question. The blueprints RFC updated. Is that in a PR or did you push straight to the to the repo already? Just wondering if there's space for Scott to also like put comments and stuff.
It's still in a PR.
So, oh, cool. Sweet,
Yeah.
sweet. Thank you.
I was looking for it so that we could share that.
Is this, Rush, is this the PR that we were talking about service accounts regarding?
Well, service accounts will affect this because this doesn't discuss service accounts. Why can't I paste? There we go. Okay. Service accounts will affect this because this does not talk about where we're going to land service accounts. And I've been talking to folks about the thing that I said to you, the proposal I said to you, and I'm still strongly in favor of that because I think there are a couple of patterns we can use to really strengthen habits, because your concern, I think, was that folks get in the habit of doing star type permissions. And
right. I'm concerned just about Tiller v2, basically, of cluster admin stamps out everything, one user to rule them all of the controller.
Right.
Instead of bespoke service accounts.
Right. So one thing I will be recommending is that all templates, blueprints, blueprints that carry any kind of creation, also have in their doc a cluster role, and that cluster role defines the roles required to use that template, and a label match to a global cluster role binding for Cartographer, so that when you delete or add the document for your template, you also take the role binding. Less garbage collection issues with that approach as well.
Right. So use aggregated roles in order to give the permissions accordingly.
Yeah.
Oh.
And if that's not sufficient, I think Scott Andrews was talking about perhaps we do have service accounts described at the binding, the blueprint binding level. So that's the object that selects blueprints against owner objects, and that would specify what service account to use. I would just like to really test the waters of not needing to do that.
Yeah, and I think with aggregated roles, it could be made a lot better. I didn't think about that option before. And if we do end up implementing the namespaced blueprints at some point and not just the cluster ones, then you could just do a role for that specific namespace, which someone may have the ability to do that doesn't have the ability to create cluster-wide roles and whatever, and allow iteration in that manner.
Yeah.
So one gotcha there is that role does not support aggregation. So they would have to be individually bound to the service account in question in that case.
Oh, and they can't be because it would be in the different namespace, because it would be in the cartographer system or whatever namespace and not in the user's namespace. So
Yeah.
you can't bind to
So
it.
yeah, to do anything to namespace level, we would have to, so I guess either you have to grant the permissions to cartographer cluster wide, or we would have to allow the blueprint mapping or the blueprint binding to specify a service account. And if it's a namespaced mapping, then it would only, then the service account would have to exist in that same namespace, and the permissions would have to be bound into that service account however they work.
Right.
But it wouldn't be aggregatable.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Their roles can't aggregate, because that would be so nice for this use case. But yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, I do actually have a, I guess I should make my proposal doc for that a little bit more public too, and that way we can generate some more feedback.
Scott, if I can clarify your comment about Tiller v2, are you more
Yeah.
concerned about there being a service account that has cluster admin, or that all blueprints would potentially run with the same set of RBAC permissions?
So it's more the first one. And the reason that I find that problematic, because I know that by default,
Yeah.
let's say there was a platform that was a commercial product that used Cartographer out there in the ether, and it decided to use whatever Knative and Kpack and other things, it would have those things and it would have scoped on RBAC. But the second we get into the idea of namespace supply chains and people start building their own and start adding different descriptors and different CRDs and different things, what's going to happen is that over time, the platform administrators are going to get really annoyed with the amount of times they need to change RBAC. And they're just going to add cluster admin ***, AKA Tanzu package install. And basically, we're going to have a bunch of basically Cartographer will be able to do whatever it wants to do.
Yeah.
Traceability,
So
I think, can come from who created the deliverable. So I don't care that it's the same user creating it. I'm just worried about that single point that has full access.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Also, it's the nature of RBAC that we can't ever prevent that. Like, if someone with permissions to create a cluster role binding creates a cluster role binding to cluster admin.
Right. Exactly. No, there's nothing
they
that
get
could
what
be
they
done.
asked for.
Exactly. That's where, like, if this is the, that's where I was saying, like, that was my one caveat with this approach, where what I had mentioned to Rash was, I think this from a UX perspective makes it so much easier, right? Like, I don't need to give the permissions to the service account for the user in every single namespace to be able to stamp out all these resources, right? From a UX perspective, it's great. There's other tools out there that are doing similar things, right? This is how things like Waypoint runners work. In HashiCorp's, whatever developer tools and whatever. It's a known pattern of having the controller have the ability to stamp out the resources. On the other hand, when those resources could be anything I want them to be and any CRD, and when that becomes the case, the question becomes, how often will it be that a platform will not have cluster admin if this is the approach? Because down the road, especially if namespaced blueprints get implemented, that's where people are going to start writing their own controllers and writing their own CRDs to do random things. And it's just going to get out of hand, possibly. I don't know. I'm, kind of just contemplating and thinking about it, but that would be my one concern with this.
Well, we keep talking about, well, you keep talking about, but it certainly comes to mind for other folks that what about namespaced blueprints? And I think the use case is what's really important there. It sounds to me like, because in my mind, the use case for a namespace blueprint was that people should be able to mess about, but not have too much blast area. Not that you should be able to end up with lots and lots of bespoke stuff all over your cluster, because it's kind of an anti-pattern of what we're trying to achieve. So my first question is it still an anti-pattern that people end up with a lot of bespoke lying around in their productionized systems, or is this purely for the space to be able to play without having a large blast radius?
I mean, at least from my perspective, the way that I view it is that once we move everything into a single type of CRD, basically, I know we have the descriptor, we have the blueprint, whatever, selector, we have different CRDs, but once a cluster supply chain and a cluster template, a cluster config template, image template, source template, all those become one CR, I lose the granularity of saying that a user can edit a template but can't change a supply chain. I lose granularity of being able to manage RBAC of Cartographer, and having the namespace allows me to say, great, what my paved paths to production that I support as a platform team are the cluster supply chains. You want to build your own custom things, go right ahead, build your namespace ones. That's not supported by us, but you can go ahead and play with that, get your thing running. If you want it supported, you pass that in for us to review and we'll add it into a cluster supply chain. That will actually make this an official blueprint of the system, but it allows the developer to not be blocked on the platform team creating something that would be appropriate for their specific use cases. However, the difficulty there becomes the RBAC. When it's a single role that would be used for also the namespaced ones, we don't really get that flexibility necessarily of what resources they could use.
Well, they could use any resource. I mean, if they were able to use any resource, but only within a namespace, then it comes down to what that is the create, update, the create and read of a resource, all right?
But they could only do that to resource. They could only do that to resources that the platform admin has allowed in the RBAC for it to work with. Because a typical developer does not have cluster role binding creation capabilities, right? That's usually a much higher level, right? Like when we think about it, RBAC is usually going to be the admin teams that are going to be managing that. So you get back into the, you want to create something bespoke and kind of get around us as you're iterating and want to build the right supply chain for your type of application. Great, open a ticket to us so we can create the role bindings for you for your things, then go back and forth on why you need these roles. And then they're also cluster wide. Right?
Well, I
is
mean,
where, yeah.
I mean, I was thinking more that the create, update, and read, and there's really no status update, right? Just create, update, and read of those templatable objects in a namespaced supply chain. That's roles that we give to Cartographer. We say that Cartographer is allowed to create these objects. And if Cartographer says it only ever in the namespace, it's not RBAC, but it's Cartographer's rule. These can only be in the same namespace. You can't create this somewhere else. Is there much more to apply for? I guess I'm not seeing what the...
Well, the issue is how do you tell Cartographer that I have a new foo.bar CRD that I've created, right? I've used meta controller, operator, SDK, whatever. I built my own CRD that does Canico instead of a Tecton pipeline, let's say, just as an example.
Yep.
And I created my own CRD. It's not one that the platform team is utilizing today. They haven't let Cartographer create that.
Right.
right? The issue is new CRDs. It's the proliferation of CRDs with things like crossplane, which we talked about in the last meeting, right? Things like that. The proliferation of CRDs in Kubernetes is growing. It's actually great to see a tool that's lowering the amount of CRDs they have instead of increasing to thousands like Crossplane does. But I'm making it simpler because every other tool is just getting more and more complex, I think. But the question comes when we get this proliferation of CRDs that people are going to want to stamp out, how do we manage that RBAC in a sane way?
Mm. And that's the
So
point where
adding a new
we,
CRD is already an administrative operation because it's a cluster scoped resource. So if you're adding a new resource, it's also reasonable to expect that you're adding permissions to be able to interact with that resource.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think. Yeah. So you could just say that when the CRD, when you're creating the request for the CRD, just add the RBAC. I guess. Yeah, because anyways, that is cluster admin.
I mean, the point there becomes you would be creating a role for maybe that developer and only some of their namespaces and say, oh, I'm creating a new, I don't know, can nuke the world CRD. Please make sure that only we can use it. I'm not sure that that really applies here, but let's just say that it does. Then they create permissions for that to be used in only a specific namespace. They'd also have to add that role binding to Cartographer. This sounds like it should be the same, role. So it sounds like it should be the same role anyway. And if they just add a tag, it could be picked up in two places at once. Label.
If it's a cluster role, because a role
Yeah.
can't.
Sure.
And a cluster role can have namespace scoped permissions though, Scott, right?
Yeah, so you can consume a cluster role inside of a role binding. And then that cluster role is only applied to that namespace.
But is there a way of saying, because in this case, the service account is not in the workload's namespace. It's in the namespace or the descriptor's namespace or whatever it would be called now. It's in the Cartographer system namespace. Is there a way of saying you can create object X only in namespace Y?
It's a good question.
I think it would have to, I think the service account would have to exist in that specific namespace that you want it to target. I don't think you can limit cross namespace resources like that, but I should double check that.
Okay. Yeah, because if you can do that, then that adds the most secure capability, because otherwise you're saying that otherwise with this approach, that CRD made you enabled it for one namespace, you enabled it for all namespaces.
By way of Cartographer.
Exactly, unless there was some Cartographer annotation that you read from a cluster role binding and limited your own behavior. Right, if you had your own RBAC that said allowed namespaces, and if that was there, it was or restricted namespaces that you could add to a cluster role binding, that would be an aggregated cluster role binding that would say these roles are only for this namespace, and then Cartographer would block it. It wouldn't be cube RBAC, it would be Cartographer saying, I'm not going to do this in another namespace.
It sounds like
that's a strong argument in favor of specifying a namespace within each blueprint binding. Sorry, did I say it's namespace? I meant service account.
Yeah, you did. Service account, yeah. And I understand that. I'm just thinking that that's a strong argument for doing it when we're tackling namespaced supply chains, which we don't have blueprints. So
right, as long as it's cluster supply chains, then it could be the way it is right now. When you add namespace, you add an optional field that if it's a namespace supply chain and you want to add specific permissions, then, but the question is how much change would that be to the core code of Cartographer then to start using a different service account instead of what you're using today? Meaning, is that just pushing it off and then adding a lot more complexity of refactoring to support both methods down the road?
Don't work that way. I am certain that the rest of us are going, if it is something that we can say is a bridge far away, right, then let's leave it as a bridge far away. We've got a solution to what could be done, and we know what might need to be done to make it happen. Today, we don't have to incorporate that complexity to implement. So yeah,
Right.
I think that's the way I would look at it. And I'm pretty sure the rest of the team's the same. Yeah, I mean, we've already had to do it. So we already had the experience of what it's like to bring in lots of different rules around how we will attach service accounts. And what it has done is introduce complexity that it doesn't require a refactoring. It's just complexity. It's about watching the bindings and it's about becoming responsible. It's all of the stuff that's baked into the service account for a controller, but you then have to re-implement it on your own. The controller has a service account, and when things change for that, the controller just follows those rules. I can now create API just works as it should, but we have to sort of re-implement all of that kind of logic internally when we accept service accounts, because we have to watch for role bindings and we have to watch for roles changing. And yeah,
Right.
yeah, it makes the code more complex. And it's like, if we want to move fast, get a new thing that's solid. If it's deferrable until we do decide to do something with namespaced blueprints, that's great. I think that's great news.
Yeah, I think that as long as we're not talking about namespace from my perspective with aggregation, I think it can make sense, and it definitely makes the UX of developer namespace preparation much easier. It's not a full line wall of YAML that I need to apply in every single namespace. That makes it much easier for the user, and also from a code perspective, as you're saying, but definitely from the end user perspective, which is what I'm looking at.
As usual, great feedback, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Has anyone else got a topic they want to cover today? Scott, did you have anything on your mind other than this blueprint proposal, NSA discussion?
Nope, nothing from my side. I just released 4 new supply chains that I just created, which are fun, and I've been working on building a bunch of custom ones now, which I'm starting to build out a catalog kind of on GitHub of different Cartographer supply chains.
Oh, well, please put a link to it in the chat and in the doc for us.
Yeah, I will. I just create whatever. I just had it so it auto generates tech docs for me, because I hate the fact that I have to run tech docs CLI every time to generate documentation for Backstage. So
Right.
it just,
I saw your request on that.
yeah, or auto pushes Backstage, or auto pushes the deliverable YAML as well to Git, so that I don't need to do a get and clean out 17 different fields to apply it to the second cluster, to a runtime cluster. So a bunch of changes like that, and built a Helm one also that just deploys a Flux CD Helm chart and knows how to template that out with YTT. So it's not limited to Knative or deployments or things like that. It can actually deploy a Helm chart resource from Flux, which is fun.
Groovy.
Oh, yeah.
You got a link for it?
Yeah, I have to find one sec. Where is that here? Right dash tab. This is the org that I've been putting them in. Let's see. Chat. That's the organization. It's just the org that I opened up where I'm putting a bunch of tap stuff, but including a bunch of Cartographer and then Accelerator and other fun things. Just a playground, basically, of things I built for customers.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, that's neat. Be rabbi tab. So is that the org? Is it? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Have you copied that down for us, Sarah? Put it in the notes.
Yeah, adding
Groovy.
there right now.
Great. That's super exciting. It's
Yeah,
great.
there's-
It's great to see someone using our stuff to the point that I have no idea what they're doing. I have to go and
Listen,
have a
I
look
had
at
to
it and
work.
learn.
I worked with the Carvel team on the Helm one to figure out how to do something in YTT for like 2 days because it was a very edge use case of how to accept a path of a variable as a dot notated string to where to replace the image that comes out of KPack or Canico into a chart value, and then how to replace that into a YAML fragment to become an overlay, which was a interesting thing, but it ended up being like 10 lines of YTT Starlark
Right.
stuff, right? But
We have,
yeah,
no, I won't hold people up much longer, but we have somewhat of a conflicting point of view about like using YTT this way, in the sense that when you start doing clever things, it's probably best to build a controller. But at the same time, it makes it less portable, right? It's I'm kind of hoping that we can use blueprints in both in sort of like both capacities. That is, that you would create a blueprint for the CRD that does the special and creative thing and then hides it behind another kind of owner object. But generally you would compose your blueprints as sub blueprints and not have to have owner objects all the way down.
no,
Because there's
I
no way you could ship this with another controller easily, right? You'd have to build the other controller and then ship it. And yeah.
exactly. I think that YTT is a great escape hatch that I try to stay away from as much as possible, but utilize, and it's great to have there as the escape hatch because the overhead also from a customer's perspective of maintaining and updating a controller, just in terms of even if you just want to maintain from security vulnerabilities. Forget the fact that you actually have to learn a programming language and write a controller and understand how controller runtime works and all the fun of that. Even if you went with something like MetaController, right, where it's really simple, or went with the Python one from, I forgot who wrote that, but there's one where you literally just write Python and it does the whole controller thing for you. It's like, okay, like that's relatively easy, but just the maintaining of that is much more difficult than YTT. Right. So that's kind of where, like in Cartographer conventions, I know the idea was brought up in an issue, and I had +1 the idea of having YTT for Cartographer conventions instead of just webhooks, because it's a easy escape hatch that makes it more accessible for someone to do. Is it the best idea? No. Is it a great escape hatch that makes the barrier of entry for someone into it good or easier? Yes.
Well, so I hope that supports the idea that we write a testing framework around just templates, even if nothing else, about the ability to just run a template with different inputs and assert its outputs.
Yeah, there is also work going on that I've been pushing hard with the Carvel team of creating an LSP for YTT itself, which will allow for a lot of things to be much easier with YTT to actually know what's going to happen.
If we can get that to work in an LSP for Cartographer as a sub language, that would be really awesome.
Exactly. Once they have that, to like be able to nest that into a YTT section within Cartographer and exec out that would be huge.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something that is definitely on the YTT team's mind after I have been telling them for the last year that I want that. And now they're also wanting it. Once they figure out how to write an LSP is what I was told.
Oh, they can ask me if they want to do it in JavaScript.
Exactly. But yeah, no, so they're so I'm definitely, I think that's moving in that direction in Carvel, which will make it much easier, I would think. Hopefully.
YTT becomes the language of Knative. The scripting language of, sorry, Kate's native.
Yeah.
I can imagine it. It's still scary though.
What's better, SAR or SEN, or what's the new language for CRDs that was developed
Oh,
by
I don't
Google
know.
also?
Oh, I don't know. You'll have to link us to that. I was going to say
Common
Bash.
CEL from Google, the
Okay.
whatever Common Expression Language, which is the new Rego that came out from what's it called? That just came out from Google. That's basically just Rego, but from Google.
Okay. I'll have to look at it.
Yeah.
All right, folks.
Another language we have to learn.
No, let's not. Still haven't worked out YTT myself.
Well, no, it's a validation language for CRDs. So you could write validations, like instead of writing admission webhooks, you could actually have it in your CRD. You could have cell to validate things instead of needing a validating webhook. It's actually interesting in that sense. But they couldn't have chosen a language that anyone knew because they have to be unique. Yay.
Again, thank you for your time today, Scott.
Yep.
What's that about, Andrews? I'm calling you Andrews.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
WebAssembly text.
Oh.
Huh.
Yep. I did see
There
that
was
at
a
some
good
point.
talk. There was a good talk at KubeCon about bringing WebAssembly into the Cube API server to not require aggregated API servers, but to be able to run WebAssembly programs within the API server itself for admission webhooks and mutating webhooks.
If you have a link to that, send it my way.
I will. I'll send it to you on Slack. I'll find it. It was a very cool talk, actually, where they did a POC of it working, actually, and it works pretty cool.
It's a Lisp, right, Scott? Excuse me.
What?
It's a Lisp
WebAssembly
type.
text.
Yeah.
Is what?
I mean, there's two different syntaxes within it, but it's very low level. Let's just say that. It is emphasis on the assembler part of it.
All right. Well, we better get moving along anyway. I'm sure
It's-
everyone's got things to do with their day. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Bye all.
All right.